All right, everybody, come on in. I got a bonus session for you today. So thank you for joining. I see you're all coming in. That's great. You can leave your comments and we'll try and get to them. I'm happy to be joined. I'm Edwin Eisendrath, and I'm happy to be joined today by Nicholas Grossman. Nick is professor of international relations at the fabulous University of Illinois. He edits Arc Digital. He wrote a book called Drones and Terrorism, which turned out to be an eerie look at the phenomenon that is getting only creepier by the second. So, Nick, welcome.
Hi. Thanks for having me.
So, I can't imagine trying to teach international relations right now, um, because everything that we've known about it, at least my whole life, seems to be falling apart. And times of transition like this are dangerous. They're dangerous. So let's get to that sort of towards the end of our conversation. I don't think we've laid the predicate yet. So
Sure.
yeah, let's start with this week. We had this Munich Security Conference,
hmm
right? And they ask questions like, "Will the United States draw down its troops in Europe?" Or, um, "Can Europe build its own identity separate from America in foreign policy?" And then, of course, our politicians showed up and said, "Our foreign policy is a MAGA policy. We're going to boost Putin and AFG and National Rally and all that right wing stuff in Europe." How do you see this in the arc of our history?
So I think it is almost impossible to overstate it that the international system that we have known, just about everybody who's alive today has known,
Right.
is being upended as we speak. So the world is organized in post World War II, and then especially post Cold War, centered around American power and the idea of that we all grew up with in the United States of America as leader of the free world and champion of democracy and all that stuff. It's always flawed. There are always caveats. Of course, the United States was far from perfect at it. But nevertheless, the structure of world power had the US as the world's most powerful country and all these different institutions and alliance networks that where the US was the center of it. And the most powerful one of those, by far, most powerful alliance in all of history is NATO. And at the center of NATO is American power. And so the highest level structure of the security of the world, think like nuclear deterrence, that level, is based on the idea that everybody knows or believes, and the US puts so much effort into convincing people of this. Everybody believes that if you mess with the United States or a US friend, you're messing with the world's most powerful country, so don't do it. And then build the rest of the world around that. And it's similar with the economic system. A lot of it flows to the United States. And by uh, reducing the commitment to NATO, by making a lot of people doubt it, by being friendlier to Russia. And in this security conference, a great example of Secretary of State Marco Rubio spoke, and he's talking about the security threats to Europe or joint security threats of Europe and America. And he does not mention Russia. I don't mean that he brings it up in any sort of way that people might not like. I mean, he literally doesn't mention it. He doesn't mention the Ukraine war until discussions afterwards and questions somebody asked him. He doesn't talk about China. What does he talk about? That Europe, about Western civilization, and essentially that Europe is not white and Christian enough. That their big threat, he's explicit about this. Their big threat is immigration. Says a lot about security threats of immigration, not about Russia. And so, where you had a literally 80 years of the structure of the world based on the idea that US and Europe are effectively one, or at least obviously not the same country, but are one power joining one force in the world to try to keep things authoritarians like the Soviet Union, Russia, China at bay, and to uphold, at least to some extent, things like international law. And the US has abandoned that role, and the Europeans are catching up to that. But
Yeah.
the US effectively decided to abandon it less in the 2024 election. And we have been seeing that play out in all sorts of ways. But with this conference bringing it home, that the Americans, instead of saying, we are working together to try to counter joint threats like Russia, instead, they end up saying things like, your problem is immigration, and we're really concerned about that. And also, you should give us Greenland.
Nick, I want to. There are a lot of things that Americans are saying, like, they don't work very well. We need to get rid of them and do something better. But this system that was set up after World War II, I think it's worth saying that nobody benefited from it more than the United States and the
hmm
people who live, right? So this was a system that was based on American post-war values. It was generous. The whole world did benefit in some ways. Wasn't perfect, God knows, and there were some huge mistakes in when we globalized. But by and large, it lifted a lot of people out of poverty, and it was very good for the United States. So, in throwing it away, what does the administration say will replace it that's better for us?
Well, they don't really say replace it with anything. That they don't seem to have any plan of that. It's disliking it to the extent they move towards something. It seems like a pre World War One, different autocrats and empires competing over spheres of influence to the extent that they actually have it. But I really do think it's worth emphasizing how much it benefited the United States, and what the U.S. did after World War II was something that had never really been done before, especially on not that scale, but was do
Right.
something act kind of like an empire, but one where it was based on voluntary alliances and mutual benefit. And so you think of all different empires throughout history. I don't know, the Mongols or the Romans or the more modern Napoleon or the British or others. They
Mhm.
have bases in other countries because they force their way in there. They make it by force that those countries have to accept them, and they impose a lot of those things on those countries. Whereas the U.S. military, most powerful military in history by far, has all these bases all over the place, greatly increases U.S. military capacity because those countries voluntarily do it. And NATO is a great example of this. Since starting with Eisenhower in World War II, the Supreme Allied Commander of NATO was always an American, which means that all these other countries take some of their own military forces and put it under the command of an American officer, not because the US has somehow forced them or says we're going to kill all of you if you
Well, we didn't turn France into a colony.
don't. It's right. None of them into
No.
colony that
Right.
there are, and there are some strings attached. It would be naive to pretend that there aren't, but where it is a deal that they choose to voluntarily do, and it made the United States so much richer and more powerful than it would have been otherwise. And
Safer.
yes, and that could have possibly done on its own. And you can even see this now in things like with the Ukraine war, that Russia, where it gets help from, it has some help from Iran and North Korea. It can buy some stuff from China, but that's about it. Whereas when the United States after 9/11 gets attacked, US goes into Afghanistan, there are Britain and Australia and Denmark and a lot of other countries send their own troops and have their own people die. And I say that's one of the reasons why the Greenland thing is so egregious, is because the highest per capita of deaths in Afghanistan for anybody besides the United States in the coalition was Denmark. So it was the
Yeah,
Danes.
and the U.S. Embassy in Copenhagen took down the flags honoring the Danes who died in Fallujah fighting for us.
Yeah, I think it was mostly Afghanistan as opposed to Iraq, but
I'm sorry, you're right. Yep,
yeah.
yep.
But I mean, regardless, it's for the U.S. is the key part of it, and the that it's just such an insult, such a middle finger, and so totally unnecessary is the other part about it. There's no clear gain, but I do think a lot of what the Trump administration and a number of critics, primarily think right wing, but also maybe some farther left wing critics of the United States, of have. Think of the help the U.S. does in the world as like a favor to other countries, as if NATO is a favor to other countries, to the other countries in NATO, that the U.S. is helping them out of kindness, or perhaps you could even say like a bleeding heart naivete. And the reality of it is, no, it makes the United States militarily, economically so much stronger than it would be otherwise, because
Mhm.
all these situations are set up to build up other people. But keeping the U.S. at the center of it is where that's
Yeah.
like with the Freed Allied Commander thing is, oh, all of you will get stronger and have peace and prosperity as a result of this, as long as you recognize that we're in charge and you set up your military structures such that they don't quite take orders from us, but occasionally do some of
We operate together. Yeah, wow. Okay, so we've talked about a little bit about this structure that's under attack, that they really don't have anything to replace it with, but maybe they do because we've walked away from the United Nations in many ways. Certainly walked away from the World Health Organization. But this week, Donald Trump had a meeting of his board of peace. Could you explain to people what I have very strong feelings about this, but I want
it.
to hear from you. What does Trump say the Board of Peace is? What does he say he wants to accomplish? And what is he actually doing?
So, to the extent they say anything, they keep it vague, and this is anyone who's familiar with him, knows that he always keeps a lot of these things goals wise very vague, and keep watching or I'll tell you. And part of that is the running kind of his old TV producer instincts, or reality TV of for next week, but also because if you don't ever really commit to anything concrete, then there's no particular thing you have to achieve or fail. So look at the Ukraine war. It's, we are going to end that in a day or end that in a week, but never says how or what specific goals are, or, the US wants this exact thing to happen. In the Board of Peace, they call it, where it's more of the focus had been on Gaza and on rebuilding Gaza, of where they say is a specific action, but it ends up being a like who's who of the world's corrupt autocrats, and where it is an alternative structure kind of to the UN. Why the US would need an alternative structure to the UN makes no sense. I mean, you can see the UN literally is in New York City. And it was in San Francisco at first, but the capital, everyone has to travel to America to go to the UN. The US doesn't have to travel to other countries to go to the UN. And with this, alternative structure would be because the UN does things like international law, and Trump and these other autocrats aren't into that. And so this is also tied up in saying that they're going to rebuild Gaza by making it into a resort where it's a real estate deal that they own. They never really say what's going to happen to all the people that are there, including the people that don't want this to happen, including all the different political factions. They don't ever really get into security. They don't get to human rights. If you actually thought through what they're talking about, it would be an ethnic cleansing plan, or some degree of almost an enslavement plan. But then again, it's probably not going to go anywhere in that direction, because he has set it up where you have to pay fees to be a part of it, at least long term. The countries have to pay $1 billion. And by its charter, that he is the chair of it. And this is him personally, not the president of the United States, but he personally is the chair of it, that supposedly persists beyond when he would be in office.
That's here for life.
Yes, and so they're for life, and where they all say that they're going to pledge money for this big conference, that they're all going to put up $1 billion, and you put up a billion towards Gaza. And are they actually moving money? No. When you listen to them on why will they do it, they all have their old ideas about Israel-Palestine that they've been advocating, and they all say, well, if I see, like the Saudis say, well, if we see a two-state solution in a Palestinian state, then we'll put up a bunch of money. And Trump BS's his way through a lot of this, and has also said the U.S. is going to put up $10 billion, where there's no U.S. law that says that, where it's coming from, who controls it. Is it?
Oh, well, we know he doesn't care about the congressional appropriations process. He thinks the Treasury's his.
Yeah, and so it's I don't know. It's more or less the global corrupt oligarchy organization.
So are we safe in ignoring the Board of Peace?
Sorry.
Are we safe in ignoring the Board of Peace, or do we have to take it as a threat?
Um,
It-
I don't
to
know
the
yet.
extent that it undermines
Mhm.
the order that has done us so much good, it's a bit of a threat, I think.
Uh, Part of, I don't know if the Board of Peace itself is, because I don't really
Yeah.
think it's going to do anything. But
Okay.
it is a component of the much
Yeah.
larger problem, in the way that the Trump administration is upending the world order that, for better or worse, was a better world order than the one of the before World War II. So the World
Mhm.
War and the Age of Empires.
So the way we've seen foreign policy work with Trump is very coercive. You will do what I say, or I will bomb you, or I will triple your tariffs. This week, the tariffs got dinged by the courts. I think that's going to change the calculation of some of the countries that have um, been so eager to appease him, because this enormous weapon has been taken out of his arsenal. What do you think?
I'm not so sure about that.
Unlovely?
In that, first off, a lot of what the weapon was the ambiguity of it, the uncertainty that,
Mhm.
not so much I'm going to impose a specific tariff on you that I will follow through on in detail and have a lot of people implement, which is something that he's never. And there has been definitely some with the tariffs, but not all that clear. But I'm going to jerk you around. I'm going to change it this way, change it that way, arbitrarily, and inject uncertainty into your business community, and create those economic problems, closer to something like extortion than perhaps like a leveraged diplomacy, let's say.
Mhm.
But the reason why I was hesitant to say that he's lost his tool is because Already, the White House has talked about alternative methods of using tariffs. And we can see as a precedent something from the first term, where this was with the Muslim ban, that a lot of courts ruled that it was unconstitutional. It was clearly a religious test and was unconstitutional. It gets to the Supreme Court and they say, okay, yeah, we don't totally agree with a lot of these earlier rulings, but yes, it's unconstitutional. If you just change a few of these things, maybe it'll be constitutional. And right as that was over, new executive order, another Muslim ban, almost the exact same thing, slight little tweaks. And this process happened a second time. And again, the Supreme Court said you can't. And again, when a lower court then stayed a new version, Supreme Court said, wait, you got to let it go ahead. And so we effectively had a Muslim ban just with changing it multiple times. And so the Trump administration will almost certainly find ways to mess with other countries' economies and to try to demand tribute, kind of extra payments for themselves. And that will have a lot of the similar effects that the tariffs had. So we're still going to have some tariffs. It'll be imposed in some ways. Who knows? He might just ignore the order. And that uncertainty as potential leverage, that is still there.
Yeah. Well, um, okay. So the Supreme Court, so he may not matter. Let's talk about war powers. Congress ceded a lot of the War Powers Act over time to president. That's not new. The last thing any of these members of Congress wants to do is their job. So they have done to cede a lot of things that they should be voting on. They really should. And working out the differences between Americans in Congress. That's what it's for. So they've given presidents extraordinary but limited power. Um, there's an argument that what we did in Venezuela is simply go to war. And Trump has said it was war, and Marco Rubio has walked it back and said, "Oh no, it was just a police action. We were just defending our guys and giving a subpoena, right, or trying to arrest a drug criminal." So that has some legal murkiness to it. Um, but sending the so-called Department of War's biggest aircraft carriers over to Iran and saying, "You will do what I tell you, or we will be bombing you left and right," cannot be anything other than a declaration of war on a country. But where does Congress fit in this? What authority does the president have? And how, again, do you explain any of this to your students?
Uh, I can I have a good answer for, say, the student one that
Sure.
I can hold for the end, like you asked. But for with the authority, that you're right in that things have shifted gradually. Part of this was logical in that the original declaration of war was from when you needed to get on a big sailboat, and we will be there months later. So then it
Mhm.
had a different role. That in the age of airplanes and especially missiles, that there are many security situations, that serious ones, that could arise where the president doesn't have time to realistically convene Congress and have a debate and have a vote. So some action makes sense. The one that was already clearly illegal that we've seen so far was, and this is not to, with the first one with Iran, but was the whole campaign on the Caribbean boat bombings, Caribbean and Eastern Pacific, because Venezuela, any of the stuff about the policing action is really forced as a legal justification. But because of that idea of time, of that they need to make quick decisions, that what the Voting Rights Act says is the president can use
War
voting power.
powers.
Yeah, the voting power. Oh, I said voting rights. Jeez.
Yeah,
Okay. Yeah, so that one's also on my
there's
mind.
that
No,
too.
no,
Yeah,
the War Powers Act. Thank you.
yeah,
Yes, the War Powers Act of 1973 says that the president can use force without congressional permission in the event for things like self-defense and other national security emergencies. But then some presidents like Obama use that one for Libya. So stretched to, that's not a
yeah,
U.S. national security emergency. It's arguably a humanitarian emergency, and U.S.
yeah.
national interest, international law emergency, not U.S. So Obama stretched that one too, and previous presidents had also.
Both of all.
Where
Yeah.
you've got 60, he can do it for 60 days. And if he doesn't have permission, he's supposed to then stop within 30 days. And the boat bombing, Caribbean bombing, total, no authorization from Congress, no self-defense argument. Drugs are not arms. Drug dealers are not terrorists. The terrorists do it for politics. Drug dealers do it for money. And even on that, it's terrible strategy in that doing a bombing of a lot of these different low-level drug running boats is not going to do anything about the organizations. At worst, it'll make them use a few land routes or pay a little more money. And so by U.S. law, by international law, by strategy, by just the basic truth of language, everything about the Caribbean campaign was wrong, and it exceeded beyond the 60 days, and he just kept doing it. It's still going
Yeah.
now.
And you did not even mention the follow-on shooting of people who are clinging to the side of a boat in the water.
Right, and those are explicit war crimes. So, one very explicit war crime is that you're not allowed to shoot at shipwreck survivors. That because they are no longer a threat. There's no argument that they're a threat. The U.S. did that; it was on video. And another one is you're very explicitly, it is illegal under international law and U.S. law to disguise military aircraft as civilian aircraft to use in an operation. Apparently, they did at least one of that disguise a U.S. military. And keep in mind also the egregiousness of this. The U.S. military does not need to disguise itself to be able to operate in the Caribbean. It's almost like war crimes for the sake of war crimes. The U.S. has total
And this is
dominance of the area. Nobody's even shooting
correct.
back.
And then just so that people understand this, this is what the U.S. and Israel have accused Hamas of doing all the time, of sending combatants pretending they're civilians,
Mhm.
right? And they've used it all, yeah, and Hamas has done that, and it is a
Absolutely.
war crime, and it gets
Mhm.
civilians killed. It's an absolute war crime, but the United States would do that is so shocking and appalling and unjustified and inexplicable, and and these guys must be made to pay for that.
Oh,
So
I think so too.
that editorial.
Yeah, and I'm serious of if I'd be a strong advocate of courts martial, the some sort of I don't know special panel that investigates it. I don't think people are wrong to talk about Nuremberg as a precedent. I mean, we're not on the scale of those level of crimes, but we're still way too close. That much closer than we would want to be. I didn't even mention the Yemen campaign that there was. The last year, the U.S. went to war with the Houthis in Yemen, spent a couple months, dropped over $1 billion worth of bombs, killed a lot of people, achieved nothing, and which people like me that both study and teach about asymmetric warfare, fighting terrorist groups, insurgent groups, could have told you that the Houthis have survived this sort of thing for well over a decade. Just
The
drop.
Saudis should have told them that. The Saudis have been at war with them with our weapon for a very long time, and they didn't get there. But the Saudis said, "You stand in for us, see if you can do better." And these fools tried.
Yeah, and it didn't work. But the Iran one, I think, is the current one you mentioned, is really
Yeah.
relevant in that. Notice how what a stark contrast from the Iraq War and the lead up to the Iraq War in 2003. And I
Mhm.
am guessing most of the people in this conversation, I was opposed to the Iraq War. I did not think it was a good idea. I'm in hindsight, I guess I'm pleased to the extent one can be with this. But I'm on record. I'm in writing saying I didn't think it was a good
Me
idea
too.
and was opposed to it. And
Yep.
and yet, when look at the contrast of the lead up to that war. We had a public debate for well over a year, all the talk about weapons of mass destruction and everything else. Bush went to Congress and got authorization from Congress. It was a bipartisan bill passed in both House and Senate. Among the famous Democrats that voted for it included John Kerry and Hillary
Very
Clinton.
important. Yeah.
And so
And they went to the UN.
yep, they went to the UN. They had over, and then granted, they didn't get what they wanted and ignored them, which is not good. But public opinion, over 2/3 of Americans were supportive of it. Even
Mhm.
more so with Afghanistan and war on terror.
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
with Iran, you have no public debate, no congressional authorization, no legal argument in the sense of, for example, self-defense. It's not like Iran fired a missile at a U.S. target anytime recently.
Right.
And no attack the U.S. is responding to, no evidence of imminent attack, no even effort by the White House to claim that there's any sort of reason for they're not making any weapons of mass destruction claim. They're not making any case about how this is in U.S. or allied security interest. In fact, even the most recent reports are from out of the White House that they don't even really know why they're going to do it. That just the
Right.
possibility of attacking Iran, but without even saying, and I think it is possible that they don't actually know. I see no signs that they have a long-term plan of any of the follow-up. And we saw this in Venezuela too, that if
Yeah. I
anybody
mean,
thinks that has been over, just wait.
well, so I'm in the. I want to just respond to one thing. You said they don't make any claims about Iran and nuclear weapons.
Oh, no, no, about a Iran attack that has attacked the United States, that has
Right.
attacked, has
They've
do
already claimed that they don't have a nuclear weapons program. They destroyed that already.
oh,
Right.
right. So then it's yeah, and that was just with that was an obvious lie. There's when the U.S. bombed Iran last year, and amidst the Israel-Iran war, that the answer was Iran was totally and completely obliterated was the line that he
Totally
said.
incomplete.
And that, to everybody who knows what they're talking about, was a very obvious lie right away. And I remember saying this and people challenging me, like, do you have access to this stuff? And no, of course, I don't have classified information. What I know is damage assessments take longer than. So right after the bombs, he said it's totally gone. And there's no way that he knew that or anybody else knew that the US military, US intelligence would take things like, a little more time to analyze it. You need more
Yeah.
satellites to fly overhead, get more photos, look over those carefully, and then do a damage assessment. Takes a couple days to do,
No,
maybe a day.
this is all in character. This
Mhm,
is the same administration that said Renee Good is a domestic terrorist.
mhm.
Alex Petty is an agitator who came there to kill people. And they said that the moment they killed them, before anybody had done any investigation to find out it was all BS.
Right, it was
Why?
the story first, and with in Iran, in a way, it's remarkable because while people like Good and Preddy did absolutely nothing wrong, the Iranian government has done all sorts of wrong things over in recent years and past years.
Oh,
Time he
absolutely.
was sort of hinting at. I mean, Iran just we're only sort of seeing the numbers on this, but a lot of the reports I've seen is Iran just massacred tens of thousands of people
They did.
that in these uprisings. That
They
and
did.
a rate of to even put that in perspective, the rate of civilian death in Iran over the last month was probably faster than the rate of civilian deaths in either Ukraine or Gaza.
Hmm.
And the um,
What do you think of this, though? Donald Trump said before there were these huge outbursts, he said to the people of Iran, I am going to protect you. We will not let your government harm you. And they came out and they got massacred. Well, he wants to
uh,
punish them even for that. I mean, he didn't protect anybody.
No, and I mean, I don't think a lot of the Iranians are really hanging on, say, an American president's word in that
Yeah.
regard. That a lot of the
Sure.
protesting stuff is organic. It's where they've been living under repression for a while. There've been a number of big protests in Iran over the years, and yet. Yes, both the U.S. president signaling of we support the protesters. He said that more than previous U.S. presidents had, in part because U.S. presidents were of both parties were wary of getting directly involved, and a lot of pro
Mhm.
advocates in Iran say, hey, America, stay out of it. If you start supporting us and everybody, then the government starts saying you're puppets of America and that hurts us. Can you just stay out of it? Or do very general human rights stuff good, attacking people bad, not our business, would be mostly the way they want us to do it. But some of them might have been encouraged, sure, and said, okay, this is it. The US is going to get more involved. We should act more now. And they encourage, in Iran in particular, the son of the former Shah, of Pahlavi, who has been trying to kind of be a leader in exile. And they did encourage his people, which also kind of reminded me of the Iraq War with characters such as Ahmad Chalabi and other Iraqis in exile, who both encouraged the U.S. to go in and which American planners wrongly believed could kind of
Right.
just step in and take over the country.
So, mm, I've heard, I've tried to understand why we're sending our ships over there. Um, uh, it, the president has said, "Well, I want a nuclear deal," but he's also said, I wouldn't be bad to have regime change." He's not been clear with us about what his goals are. Um, I mean, the whole world would cheer regime change, but as is, not war to get it, but we would all cheer regime change. We would all cheer a nuclear deal. Well, we had a nuclear deal. He tore it up. Um, so what is he, doesn't he have to tell somebody why he's spending our blood and treasure to send everybody over back to the Middle East for more war?
I mean, has to, not necessarily. That it depends on to accomplish what. So, one is if you want to do forceful diplomacy, what used to be called gunboat diplomacy. If he really is trying to get a deal and is trying to use threats as leverage to get the Iranians to agree to a deal, the problem with that is then to use threats as leverage, you need to be clear about what it is that you want them to do. If you do X, I won't attack you. If you don't do X, I will. And there's been no message out of that except maybe make a deal of some type. And it's important that you mentioned the background of this with the JCPOA, the Iran nuclear deal, which also was bipartisan in the sense that it was both Bush and Obama. It was multilateral in that most of the world and the world's powers were all in on that one. And Trump let the Iranians out of it in 2018 in exchange for nothing. So the All the world's intelligence agency, including America's, the Pentagon, the United Nations International Atomic Energy Agency, all said that Iran was adhering to the core parts of the deal, that it was restricting their nuclear program, and then Trump just reneged on it, and no one else when rejoined the pressure on Iran, and Iran has subsequently ramped up its nuclear program and advanced it more. And then even when the U.S. bombed them last year, when Trump ordered some bombing of nuclear sites, despite what he said with the obliteration of it is impossible to obliterate a nuclear program by bombing from the air because you can't bomb knowledge. Anybody who saw Oppenheimer knows how to make these things more or less. And it's old tech. You can find bomb designs and enrichment designs and stuff on Wikipedia. So it's not that the knowledge itself is the part that you can get rid of. People can do it if they want. You have to get them to choose not to do it, which is why so many technically capable countries don't have nuclear weapons. Japan, Taiwan, South Korea, Germany, these the countries could, but don't do
Many
it.
countries believe they were protected by NATO and
Yeah.
American treaties. So proliferation is going to be a huge consequence of the dismantling of the order that we were talking about.
I think it's one of Trump's biggest legacies. And we saw this in term one. So the two things he did in term one were normalize North Korea as a nuclear power. He started lying about that they're not a threat and treating Kim Jong-un of North Korea well, as opposed to as a pariah. And he let Iran out of nuclear restrictions in exchange for nothing, and they increased in their development. And then in this term, that's accelerating it because, like we talked about earlier with NATO, U.S. allies cannot really trust U.S. commitments. So among the places that have started talking about getting their own nuclear weapons more openly than they did before, South Korea, Taiwan, Poland is a big one with that. The
Mhm.
Poles are serious about it. And when you look at Russia, that Russia's
You
threat
can
to
understand why.
logic. Scandinavians talking about maybe as a joint nuclear weapon. And the more nukes you have, the more people that have them, the more chance for accident, miscalculation. This is why another thing that the US set up, very much to US benefit, was reduce nuclear proliferation, make it that only people who already have them have them. And there have been a few that have gotten them otherwise, Pakistan, for example, North Korea.
You
But been very restricted, very few, and that has been a great achievement. And it keeps the United States more powerful than a lot of these other countries, and have other countries not have that counter move against the U.S. in the way that Notice how the U.S. bombed Iraq, which didn't have nuclear weapons, invaded Iraq, didn't have nukes, did not bomb North Korea, which does have nukes, and everybody else sees that too. So where it was U.S. rivals had more reason to get nukes from Trump term one, now U.S. traditional allies have more reasons to do it, and it is incredibly dangerous. And I say with the Iran stuff is potentially making it even worse. But I don't know what type of deal would be satisfying, especially since a number of the people in his ear, some hawks in the administration here, some people in Israel, definitely the Israeli government, have been pushing the United States towards attempting a regime change war in Iran. They've been trying to do this for many years in one way or another. And the nuclear deal was supposed to be the alternative path of make it where the younger generation of Iranians gets hooked on the global economy, that all the economic benefits they get from having the increased trade makes it that, in theory, was then in the future, if Iran ever said, like, hey, maybe we move towards nukes again, that there was a large business community, business class, a lot of young people and stuff that would be opposed to it.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
by threatening them a lot and by showing them, the Iranians internally, that the ones who said, you can't trust America, how could you be so stupid? If we give up our nuclear material now, they're just going to come back and impose sanctions, or just going to come back and attack us and ask for more later. They won the argument internally. They're having a giant I told you so moment. And that is going to make it extremely difficult for Iran, based on domestic politics, to make any sort of deal with somebody who is so clearly untrustworthy as the US under Donald Trump. And so that means, I think, either we've got war, or we've got something similar to last year, where the Trump orders a few bombing runs and then claims that it's a great success, even if it didn't really do all that much. Or they make some sort of empty deal, just give him something to tout, of where the Iranians don't actually do anything. We're similar to the Board of Peace in that sense, of where everyone, all you need to do is say that you're going to put up money. Whether you actually put it up later, is not a concern. I need headlines that say um, Iran makes deal, even if it doesn't necessarily do anything,
Yeah.
because we've seen from a lot of his foreign policy cares way more about the show and how much it looks for himself than
Well,
any of the stands.
they do not believe there's facts and truth. They believe narrative, and their narrative, and that's the only thing that has mattered in almost every field. What South Korea did
Mhm.
something we failed to do. Yoon Suk Yeol declared martial law and is now in jail for the rest of his life. Uh, we seem unable to be able to hold our leaders to account. I mean, I guess that's the Epstein stuff too. That,
Mhm.
again, and there's a globalist part of this. I mean, we see this Epstein thing is international. Is there a sense that the really rich people in the world are pushing the levers of countries and have created a sort of pan sovereign little power that threatens the autonomy of countries in some important way?
I don't think it is quite that far, but
Good.
sort of that there is something of a almost like a, yeah, like a corrupt billionaire access throughout the world, and
Yeah.
where you see uh Putin and Russia have elements of this, and you can see it in the Chinese government, and you can see elements of people like the Saudis and and the Emiratis and the UAE involved with this too, and some of the tech oligarchs, Silicon Valley people, and a lot of them have cross interests with each other. So I don't want to give
Mhm.
any sense of like a unified global anything.
Good.
But where they all have joint interests in disliking a system of rule of law, of any element of international law, international governance, of cooperation, of things where if there are rules, that they find it harder to take advantage of things. And so
So let's talk
they're
about
basically
law.
united on trying to break the rule system, both domestically in the US and globally, internationally, with I don't know how many of them have really thought it through. And to the extent they
Mhm.
did, speculation, but just under the assumption that then they can be more corrupt, have more freedom of action, do more of what they want, and they are converging on those interests, even if they don't necessarily coordinate on all of them.
I raised it because of something that happened that I at least read about this week. Reuters reported that the U.S. State Department is developing an online portal to allow Europeans to see hate speech and other content that's
Mhm.
banned in Europe.
Yeah.
Right? So their countries say we do not believe these lies should have free purchase, and people should be able to see them, so we make them illegal. Our tech guys and MAGA says, "Oh, cancel culture. Oh, we want all of that." And so we're going to go around. We have the State Department, the U.S. government is going to invalidate Europe's laws on behalf of these companies. Seems unbelievably
In
high.
a way, it's even a little worse than you said, which was that the what triggered this was Europe's crackdown on X, on Elon Musk's website, over the AI engine on their
Yeah.
producing child porn. So, like
Mhm.
making artificial child sexual images,
Right.
and also violating privacy laws. And there are other things the European acted on. But what specifically made them in France and Spain both raided the ex offices and have held them to legal account has been over the child porn. And yes, the reaction of the U.S. State Department is to have to try to start working to create ways that Europeans can get around their own governments and their own government's restrictions to be able to access Elon Musk's child porn generation thing. And not necessarily because, I don't know, for that only reason, but there have been similar things where they have worked for this very particular vision. And you are right in mentioning things like cancel culture has used that as an excuse of where was always this old debate on that free speech as traditionally understood and is something as I value very much, but meaning that the government can't punish you for expression, especially not expression that criticizes the government. And we can take that a little further and talk about a culture of free speech and go beyond what just is the law and say that things like, I'm at a university, great example of this, that at a university that there should be things that are technically legal to say, but that where there should be a culture of sort of allowing more academic freedom, let people go down their all and avenues, don't try to control ideas from any sort of center in a rule, and that includes things like avoiding, I don't know, a heckler's veto. So if somebody is speaking, that I don't go there and start shouting constantly so that the person who voluntarily speaks and the people who
Yeah.
voluntarily came to listen where I prevent them from doing so. And we can go
Yeah.
further than that. And yet, there has been this distorted right wing, especially associated with people like Musk, distorted version of free speech. Barry Weiss is another great example of this. Distorted version of free speech that boils down to I can say whatever I want. You're not allowed to say anything back, and you are under an obligation to spread my speech for me. You must invite me to speak. It's not enough for you. It's not that like you can't prevent me from speaking. You have to invite me. You have to promote me. You have to share my stuff. You have to. And so with Musk, when people like the governments of Turkey or India asked him to censor political opposition and ahead of elections, and he did because he likes those governments.
Yeah.
And he said, and his excuse was, well, you got to support the laws in those countries. I have no choice. I have to support the laws. Twitter under old management fought Turkey on a free speech issue like that and won, whereas he gave in. But he gave in. On the other hand, when Brazil had laws that he didn't like, because in that case they were holding their coup attempting far right leader, former leader Bolsonaro, holding him to account. And they included banning people who had deliberately spread disinformation that fueled his coup attempt. And they banned a few of those accounts. Musk threw a fit. The Brazil held fast. And did he stick to the you got to follow their laws? No, of course not. He went after fought it. And with the UK, where he really encouraged a bunch of race riots there and used it as a tool and supported it was AfD, the far right. Basically neo-Nazi party in Germany, and supported them and never says you have to follow those laws. And so
Yeah.
they have now captured the state. And that's why I don't think that terms like oligarchy are inappropriate, and have captured the state. And so as a result, the US State Department is promoting this free speech for me, but not for the version of this in Europe, which basically amounts to you are obligated to let Elon Musk break your laws and push out various bits of information into your information stream that he likes, and you are not allowed, and he does not have to do that for you, or the U.S. government or that for you, and that is we're dealing with what amounts to kind of like a I don't know fascist international that
Yeah. Of
shows
that's why I agree.
of
Right.
trying
Yeah.
to.
So let me. We have like 4 minutes, not even 4 minutes left. Like time is flown by. I want to do this again, but in the time we have left, go back and tell me, how do you explain this moment to your students, and how do you put it in context?
Sure. So it's weird. It is a weird time to be a political science professor and international relations professor. In particular, last semester, I taught a class called American Foreign Policy. And I told them just flat out that I had to do it as a before and after way to talk about it. So there are sections of that class where I get into the how foreign policy actually works. Who in the State Department really does this? Who's making
Mhm.
the decision, and then who actually execute it? How does it actually work? And it used to be it was like the deputy undersecretary of whatever, and now it is the president's son-in-law and real estate investor friend, that's Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner,
Yes.
who, yeah, I mean, I assume and probably most people know.
Yes.
But anyway, just to clarify.
Yeah.
And so that is a literal how it is done changed. But also, I don't. I haven't been holding back with my students. I always make a point to emphasize that when it's a matter of opinion, when it's a matter of fact, they definitely do not have to agree with me on any matters of opinion. I warn them if I'm ever going to say, okay, this is now something I think, but there are people, maybe that dispute this. But there was a specific moment for me when I had to make this decision where Trump forced it on me. And it was in his first term. And it's one I mentioned already, is when he declared publicly there's no longer a nuclear threat from North Korea. And it turned out I was teaching in my Introduction to International Relations class. We were learning about nuclear deterrence that week. And so I was put in this position where I either had to effectively call the president a liar and say what he said is simply not true, or I had to mislead my students, and I will not mislead my students. And so at that point, no, I am open with them about things like the United States is no longer a full democracy. And that is something from the various political science measurements. If anyone, probably the world-class one on this is called VDEM, if anybody wants to look it up,
I
where
teach a
it
course
was.
on challenges to American democracy, and the last time I taught it, which was in the fall,
Mhm.
it was a current events course. I mean, it was right, very hard to get around that. For those of you who are listening, the Economist Intelligence Unit comes out with its annual democracy index in the next couple of days, and it will be a barn burner. Yeah. All right. Well, listen, I've loved this conversation. If people want to follow your work, how do they do it?
So I run a website called Arc Digital, which is pretty easy to Google or name me. That's where I put all my articles. I'm on Blue Sky and Threads. I'm most active on Blue Sky. That's where I'm on almost every day and always like interacting with people. And really quick, just before I go, I saw a question in the chat of somebody asked, like, can we ever, I don't know, get out of this? And the answer is eventually yes. Or how will the world ever trust us again? If you look at U.S. alliances with Germany and Japan, so people get over it. Eventually, people get over things, but that for a lot of the world, a lot of U.S. allies in Europe and NATO was good examples of it. We already had our mulligan. We already got our do-over. It's the second election. It's the
Yeah.
first time they tell themselves it was a fluke. Now they have to do things like national security planning, telling themselves we are, even if the next president is very pro NATO, whenever that happens, it's very pro NATO, they still have to tell themselves we are 4 years away and some, swings of a few rural white voters in Wisconsin or wherever away from having our total national security upended. And therefore, they will be very wary of trusting the United States. But you know what? Something like, I don't know, big war with China breaks out and they're all under threat and they all join together again. So, who knows? But yeah, I think we're going to be digging out, even in the best case scenario, we are going to be digging out of this for a very long time.
Yeah. Internationally and domestically. Uh, Nicholas Grossman, thank you. Really appreciate it.
Sure. My pleasure. Yeah. Thanks for having me.
Bye.
Goodbye.